kick off in a minute or so. Good. Incredible. Thank you all for being here. I'm sure people will continue to trickle in. We're really excited to go through Fireside together. It will, as always, be a collective meaning-making exploration, perhaps more this week than ever, given we're talking about Ethereum's history and state, and one of the readings was meaning. And this week, I think last week there was a good suggestion about a Slido that we can use to organize questions. The Zoom chat, we're always really excited about during these calls. That's where I spend some of my time trying to navigate some of the beautiful conversations and ideas there and weave them into the conversation. So that is always the priority of Fireside, is your questions, your thoughts, the ways that we can weave them in with our beautiful guests. And we have one this week, Toby Shorin, that I'm really, really excited to introduce you to. A few housekeeping things as normal during Fireside. We want to make sure first that Toby knows, who we are. And I'll keep this side brief, not to embarrass anyone. Toby knows that the groups that come together around Kernel are incredible groups of people from diverse backgrounds that push our thinking in an incredible number of directions. And they come from backgrounds that can be legible and can be seen on this slide, but many identities that move beyond what can be put into words. And we've been really grateful. We've had a couple weeks so far to get to know everyone. For the fellows, it's a big week leading into the first Adventure Time where we introduce the Kernel Peer Mentors. In the Adventure Time Slack channel, you see the list of mentors. That's actually kind of a shortened version of what's on your slide here. This is mentors that have been with us across blocks, and we did a good look through, and pretty much everyone on this slide is somebody that I feel confident if there's a good reason, a clear question that you would like to have exploration with any of these people, they really are excited to meet with people in Kernel. And so please consider them resources. We will welcome them to Slack over the next day or so. And then at Adventure Time, they'll be with us for getting to know the gather. So for those who know how the go-karts work in there and know how to navigate the Kernel Cafe, please help the mentors as they get in tomorrow. The only other thing to say is that we'll introduce that flow where you can ask for your current week's burning questions in the Adventure Time channel. So there's a flow there that kind of pulls up this Slack form that you see that you can use to guide any of the burning questions that you might have for Adventure Time. So our rhythm for you will be on Wednesday-ish or Thursday here at Firesides every week, just give you a sense that, okay, there's about 24 hours until Adventure Time. If you do have something that's really been with you, post it in the Adventure Time channel. It helps us as stewards get a sense, and the mentors themselves, we hope, will be active in that channel alongside guides. And so it's a way for us to just kind of like collectively swarm around the ideas coming up from those adventures. We've kicked off the guilds this week, as many of you have been involved. We did token communities, we did DeFi, and we did gaming yesterday. Movement happens with Antonio right after this. And then next week, we have Regeneration, Thousand Dragons with Kia, which Toby will enjoy, and another guild that I'm missing that's also kicking off, Open Data, which is the one that I'm particularly excited about. We also have many convos that have been going, And those include dinners that I know have happened in Nairobi, New York, and in cities everywhere. San Francisco had a big one. And so if you haven't been to one yet, or if you are still looking to explore the Convos app in general, there's lots of online things happening. One yesterday on, was it Stigmergic Wisdom, Andy, that you spent some time in? That one was a doozy from what I hear. So lots of opportunities for proposals of ideas of conversations that you want, as well as things to join if you're so inclined. So take them all as they come. Really, Fireside is intended to be a place to slow down and to take a deep breath and just kind of explore ideas. If it serves you to move around during this call and walk in an outside place, or turn your video off and stretch around, or whatever it is that feels like it would allow you to explore these ideas with us, well, do those things, and we'll do our best to have it be a container for everyone's thoughts. And we'll, I'm sure, do that collectively in the chat and via the Slido this time as well. So with that, I'll pass it to Andy to talk us a little bit through the week's readings and explorations before we introduce Toby.
Thank you so much. So we dive into the most high energy week in Kernel, and it has been a lot. I hope you've been enjoying it. And we look primarily at Ethereum's state and history in the syllabus this week, particularly through the lens of these two interwoven inquiries into meaning and value. So you will see that each week, the two lessons which lead each module, which we're now calling inquiries rather than lessons, given the nature of all of our interaction with them, have some Web3 elements and some personal elements. These are often difficult to delineate clearly, to draw an absolute boundary between. And this week is the most explicit example of that, because value can be as personal as meaning can be related to Web3. And it just so happens that this is the way it fell out in the syllabus, that the personal inquiry is meaning and the Web3 inquiry is value. But they really are interwoven in very, very in a multifaceted manner. The piece on meaning makes the point that you will find meaning is made between people. That's the nature of our relationships, and the shapes of the networks within which we relate are largely responsible for the identities that we take on and for the meaning that we're capable of making within those roles. The piece, as a practical reference, encourages us to think about the media in which different kinds of meaning are made and the possibilities that allows for. So the example that is given here is Phil Zimmerman publishing the code of PGP, which is pretty good privacy, as a book. And using the First Amendment, the protection of free speech, as a means of rooting around the Arms Control and Munitions Export Act, which is a wonderful example of a creative use of medium that allows for the spread of meaning in ways which are difficult to capture in words, because the language in which that meaning is being propagated is not like the natural language that I am speaking right now, even though it's published as a book, which is really fascinating and protected by free speech. And this theme carries through into value, where we say that value is created from trust in clearly shared truths, little t, this kind of common knowledge that public adversarial ledgers are good at establishing. But what really matters is the efficiency of the language in which you tell your fictions, right? So fiction is the lie that reveals the truth. The fictions that we talk about in both meaning and value are not to trivialize the notion. It's just to understand and see clearly that we are surrounded by fictions. The legal fiction of the firm, right, is one that enables an enormous step forward in human coordination and organization, but it is a fiction, right? And again, this is not to trivialize it. It's just to draw our attention to the fact that when we are considering how meaning is made in the modern world and what is truly valuable about it and the ways that we share it with one another, we need to take into account the efficiency of the language in which that fiction is enacted. This is one of the most exciting things, and one of the reasons that we move into Ethereum so quickly. It's not because we don't like Bitcoin, we do. It's a very interesting historical moment that makes possible so much new thought and innovation. One of which is Ethereum. It's just that the inclusion of a quasi-Turing complete language within our money that Niran spoke about last week is a truly interesting step forward, because it allows us to execute mathematical consensus fictions in highly efficient ways. Now, note that I said efficient and not necessarily good. This is one of the deeper underlying aspects of why we try and weave together personal and Web3 inquiries, because, it's one thing to speak about public goods, for instance. It's another thing to try and understand what is good for the public. And this is why we have our dear friend Toby with us today, because Toby is one of the people I know that certainly understands this E.E. Cummings quote at the end of the meaning value, which is that to know is to possess, and any fact is possessed by everyone who knows it, whereas those who feel truth are possessed, not possessors. And when we have that experiential reality, we can begin to think about not just the efficiency of the languages in which we tell and deploy our fictions into shared reality, but also the ends, right? Technology not as an end in itself, but as a means to an end, which is variously put as, the service of life or liveliness or living well together. There are many of these kinds of avenues which we might explore, based both on the piece of Toby's and the other internet that you will find in this week's module, which is in the Dreamers piece and references public goods. Positive Sum Worlds is the title. I highly recommend it. And his most recent essay, which is Life After Lifestyle, which is a delight and has recently been shared in the Culture Channel. If you're keen on joining us tomorrow, we might also have a look at some of that stuff, and certainly will do so over the course of the guild. But that is the playground for today's conversation, and it's such an honor to have Toby with us and to welcome you back, Toby, for another Kernel Fireside. The ones with you are always a delight and a lot of fun. And Vivek, if you have any further things that you would like to introduce Toby with, any other compliments with which we should shower him before peppering him with difficult questions.
I'll spare Toby, and I will just say that the work of the other internet is, in my opinion, seminal at this point in terms of the way to think about healthy use of whatever it is that's being built by all of us. So Toby, please, if there's anything that has already stood out, we could start there. I think that people will get to know you and your work through the conversation, because we reference it often.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction. Goodness, where to begin? I think I really am interested in the the ideas of where value and meaning come from. Actually, before I begin, first, I think it would be nice to say that a lot of the work, including the Life After Lifestyle work, has been influenced by other people who couldn't actually make it today. And Aaron Lewis and Dina Yago in particular really influenced my thinking on this topic. So they're here in the room, in the blurred background of ideas. So yeah, first just want to acknowledge them, and you should find out about their work too. But yeah, I think what's resonating around the theme is meaning and value, and where those things come from, the unclear distinction between them, and like how they're produced in community. Ethereum being maybe a substrate for creating these types of shared meanings and values, and the potentialities and limits of like the possibility space created by that platform, and also by other affordances of online tooling networks and protocols. There's a beginning. There's a beginning.
Wonderful.
There's an entry point.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So in I'm the kind of person who really enjoys speaking about limits first, because I think that really helps kind of give shape and a practical ground to the conversation that we talk about. So I love that you bring that up in terms of like not just the potentialities that technology enables us to consider as we make meaningful communities or create value one amongst each other. It's also like what limits are there to the like effects that technology can have, because that helps us understand so much about our role as humans and what it means to be alive and in service of life. Mm-hmm. So, I'm interested in like to talk first about like what are the limits of like community life as you see it at the moment, and how are we to kind of navigate those, like just the recognition of those limits, so that we can have like honest conversations about the power of a community or the power of a brand and the role that it can play in our lives within healthy boundaries.
I guess one of the limits, the internet has like given people the ability to create these kind of subcultures and communities, and it's been lauded or perhaps like lionized for its ability to do this. But one of the limits, to speak only to like online communities for a moment, one of the limits that I see of those communities that are formed online, it has to do with the way that they do create meaning, and like I guess what I would call like the density of that meaning. In the Life After Lifestyle piece, something I touched on briefly, but like I think there's a much more substantive argument to be made for, is like a kind of idea of where meaning comes from, that you see in this like diagram of culture. Can I just share my screen? Let's do it. Hell yeah. Sorry, I'm taking over. So I have culture in the middle of this, but like you could say that like meaning is there too, or that like maybe meaning is like what exists between these kind of interstitial elements. It's what happens in like the relation between like others, as you said in the introduction, Andy, but also between you and things and others and things. What I find interesting about these online subcultures is that while like the internet like it gives us the ability to connect with others, the basic tools that we have to construct meaning with them are effectively just language. Language is like the clothes that we wear online. It's the way that we signal, and like the way that we build up like robust communities around these signals. I think this is why like manifestos are super popular right now, for instance, because people are trying to make these more kind of, I want to say extreme, but like let's just say strong statements to like bring other people in, because in space, language and visuals are really all we have to identify around. And those two pieces are just two of what can be a much larger network of practices, stories, objects, actors, or roles and places, all of which, when densely woven together, actually produce the fabric of what it means to be in a culture and give anything that exists within that community or culture its meaning. So where, I think that online cultures are having, people may form a very deep slice of personality or identity within these cultures, but if it's only composed of language, it may not be very sticky, which or it may not give people the ability to satisfy greater needs they have.
Yeah, I love that. What strikes me as interesting here, particularly given the intro about the efficiency of the language in which you tell your fiction, is that there is also if language is the clothes that we wear online, there is a layering of that, right? So it's not when we speak computer languages, those replace natural languages, they augment it in different dimensions, right? So Solidity is not an incredibly expressive language, and it has a whole bunch of technical problems which have taken years to kind of work through. It's much better now than it was when Ethereum got going, but it's not Solidity replaces natural language. That's these kinds of executable computer languages allow for the addition of different, items to your avatar and different capabilities that you can add to your inventory, to use the language of Kia, inventories rather than identities. But what I'm kind of most interested in here, given the problem that you talk about, and the limit is really the density of meaning that we can get, because despite the fact that languages can operate in different dimensions, we can have a community that can communicates in natural language and has protocols that organize it and are responsible for certain aspects of it that exist in ones and zeros in executable language that everybody can look at and verify. There is this limit on density, and it relates to what you're talking about. In the essay in Life After Lifestyle, you talk about the CPSC, right? The cultural production service economy, and this notion that maybe it's not a terrible thing. We're not completely sure, but maybe it's not a terrible thing if brands do step forward and start providing meaning and purpose. But there's something still lacking in there, because wearing Patagonia doesn't mean that you camp and leave no trace, right? Or there's something still lacking from those brands, from those communities. And I wonder, there's this tension for me, meaning is both made collectively but interpreted individually in the unique context of me and my experiences. So these brands in the essay, you say, well, maybe they can replace some aspects of our communal life, some aspects of religious life, some aspects of spirituality, meaning and purpose. But I wonder where you land on this idea that we both need communities which will give us purpose, meaning, value, but also healthy individuals within those communities capable of interpreting a wide variety of languages and signifiers that are unique to them, right? That what is the role of and responsibility of each of us in terms of interacting with these larger environments.
Yeah, I always appreciate your Gnostic impulse. Yeah, I guess Ooh, I think it can, yeah. I want to think about this in terms of like shared language again. Because there is, I almost feel like that's the easiest, creating your own language for things is like the easiest way to become like an independent thinker and like to develop your own like meanings and relationships with the world. And there's so many ways to go about doing that. I mean, that's kind of what poetry is about. But it's also possible to do it with others. And I've got these friends who are Kernel alums, or at least one of them is, named Norm O'Hagan and Yatu Espinoza, and they have created a truly like rich set of language for their own use. It's like this whole library of concepts that like they use with one another and with others that like kind of allows them to live in a world of their own, and that feels very special. I think communities like that want to almost be resilient to like outside influence and like develop that develop together, almost require that shared lexicon. I wonder if, I guess I feel that there is it's hard to assign a universal rule for the role of the individual in those kind of community environments. You just have to, I'm not really sure I have there's no like hard and fast rule there, and I don't have a prescription for like the individual in this era of kind of propagandistic language. But I do think that if one of the reasons I tried not to name this like religious, meaning making paradigm that I talk about emerging in the piece is giving people the ability to name it on their own is and think through it in their own terms is one way in which you resist kind of economizing on others' use of language, and like give them the agency to like develop their own labels and relationships to things. I suppose I just think that is like important to maintain somehow.
Yeah. The later on in kernel in module 7, there is a piece about the inertia of language, how if we're not aware of the language that we use and the traces that it carries, we unknowingly become the tools of past ideologies, no longer useful in the world. And you can see this in very simple ways when you talk about sunrise and sunset. It carries a geocentric model of the universe, that simple word. And we've known for 2,000 years that it is not the earth. It's not the sun that rises and sets. It's the earth that sinks into morning and rises into night. But our language still doesn't reflect that. And that, of course, like has many different resonances in terms of the shared languages we employ and how they can impose certain belief systems on others, knowingly or unknowingly. And like one of the things that I'm kind of interested in here, right, is that and that I want to draw on you with, because you've been interested for so long, and those who are familiar with Toby's writings, there's so much about like authenticity after authenticity, brands, and like when you were looking at like authenticity and what that really means, you noted that there was this kind of like ironic or even like post-ironic detachment from things, particularly in like the early 2000s, and that seems to be shifting as we go past lifestyle into these like potentially more wholesome, but also potentially more manipulative spaces where we do sincerely allow ourselves to be influenced by cultures, where we enter designed cultures, opt into them, knowing that they might change who we are, right? Like that there's a shift away from like the kind of detached irony of the early 2000s towards like something more like sincerity. And I wonder, like, is there space in your like work and research to think about like not, because like this is what Marianne Brunn is talking about. We see one paradigm, okay, authenticity and irony and like sort of detachment, and then we like, as soon as we see it and label it as a paradigm, we move on to the next thing, and it's like, no, okay, like sincerity. And this is why we swing constantly between like ironic detachments and then sincere influence, and kind of like, I'm wondering if there's a space in the research for like the confluence of sincerity, knowing that you can be influenced by like designed and intentional like subcultures, with the irony, right? That like you can perform the ritual, you can dance around the fire and rub ash on your face, but with a sense of like the irony of doing that, recognizing that it can be a meaningful thing, but also that it's not the only way of contacting God, right? To be blunt about it, like there's like you can pray in this way, but there's this ironic recognition that there are many other ways of praying that protects us from sliding into like dogmatic imposition, while still allowing for the sincere possibility of genuine communion, whatever that means in
I think
context.
oh, sorry. There's so much to respond to here, but I think it's so, dogmatism is very difficult at this point in time. I think like even for the devout Christian, for example, one has to acknowledge that like the most devout Christian has to acknowledge that like there are atheists and agnostics and other religious folks around who they can't entirely dismiss, because they make sense and they live in this world as well, and they seem to be coping just fine. For those millennials who are starting from a place of perhaps a default place of like scientism and faithlessness, that kind of pluralism is the default stance. So I'm not sure it's possible to reach at least from what I've seen, it's not that possible to like reach a really dogmatic place. But for those who do move closer into some sort of faith, or like willingness to be influenced, there is a certain humility to it, I suppose, which is maybe what you're getting at with irony. I almost prefer to think of it as like play, or playfulness, or like humility, of knowing that there isn't like, I wonder if the feeling that I could ascribe to people is, if even I, who was once faithless, is able to be sincerely moved by this, then like how could I take myself so seriously and like require others to like feel the same as me? At least I would hope that's the case.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Humility and play. Make many appearances, hopefully in our interactions with each other more than anywhere. That's that also Mr. Lewis. I know that there's like a lot of action in the chat. I do just want to like pick up like one more piece of this essay, because it does apply to like Ethereum specifically, but also the wider sort of cryptocurrency movements, and even like cryptography and the early PGP stuff in some sense, right? Which is something that Toby really like expresses so beautifully in this essay, Life After Lifestyle, with a kind of coherence that is rare. And he writes, the realization that producing culture is about producing types of personhood is the central issue of this new cultural economy. Systems of belief are sticky, compelling. And in the best version of this world, culture designers are inculcating people who are caring, giving, and selfless, or who take action to improve the world and the lives of those around them in some ways, encouraging practices that are life-giving and loving and meaningful on their own merits. And that, for me, it's just such a moving piece of that essay, and like some of the most hopeful I've ever seen you in the written word, Toby. So I love that. I wanted to thank you for it on a personal note, and just hear a little bit more. Like either you can pick up the theme of like cultural production as producing personhoods, or this thing of like meaningful on their own merits, right? And in service of life. Because like it's interesting, the word inculcating there, it's like it's such an interesting placement of that particular word, but it captures the ambivalence of like what it means to program crowds and what incentive structures can do, and how they produce behaviors that are difficult to predict, and yet there is this hope that like we can do it for love and for service and for the upliftment of others. This like term from the public goods essay, right? Positive Some Worlds, that like public goods are those in which the benefit of others is axiomatic. There seems that thread in your thoughts is so inspiring for me, truly.
Let me think about how to respond to this. You pick up on a lot. I really appreciate it. I feel like I want to make my way into comment on this by like speaking to the context that we're in. Like when I do these, when I've done this fireside before, I remember doing one with Lonnie that had we just immediately dropped into, like we have today, to a similar level of like talking about these very abstract and like spiritual things in a way that surprised even me, because like I also know that like there's a curriculum here, and Sam from Arweave or like Vitalik is coming in and like talking about very technical and important concepts too. Like this is a weird context that like brings all these things together, and it's amazing that you've created a space for this to happen, and that I always find myself because we go to this level, right away. You and me, Vivek, you and me, Andy, I'm sure the two of you, I always have a little bit of trouble knowing where everyone else in the chat, the 93 other people who are here are coming from, and like what context you all feel like you're in. Whether this is like a live wire for you, and or whether it feels like I don't really have access to or like feel intuitively what these guys are talking about.
If you
on that front, well, sorry, I'm trying to find my way into figuring out how to respond to like this thing that you're bringing up. I think like there's so much encouragement online in this like so-called creator economy, or like I'm sure somebody's going to say community economy if they haven't already, to create these types of spaces, these communities, and like treat them as like a medium, or like, and I think what I'm trying to speak to is that this doesn't have this isn't like just to be straightforward, like the VC designed language like wants you to think that it's neutral and good because they are funding platforms that make money when like more people get on them, that's the reason like the creative economy or creator economy exists as an idea. But like creating these communities is not like is fundamentally taking responsibility for the development of other people. It's creating a space where people have the ability to be influenced and influence one another. If you're working, if you want it to be meaningful, especially, you know, I'm sure there are some communities which are just there for interest or entertainment or reading groups or whatever it may be. But I think it's I take these things so seriously because I've also seen how people become deeply influenced by them. So the imperative to the idea that like, if not like actively inculcating these things in others, we at least must be modeling some sort of right behavior, some sort of selflessness, some sort the thing, whatever it is, whatever language we have for it, that we find good, like that we, at the very least, like we ought to be modeling that for the people who are in spaces that we've created and influenced by us. That's my that's like one of the closest things I have to some sort of like moral imperative.
Yeah. Thank you, Toby. Thank you. And thank you for bringing in the rest of kind of like the group. And I think it's important to get a sense there. There's some really great comments in the chat. I'd welcome anyone who would like to share. I think, Lorella, your most recent comment is one that could be a beautiful place to go. But I'll also just remove the spotlights from our friends here and say that as we would like to open up the conversation to Toby, we can do so and just be in good conversation. So if anyone wants to unmute to kick us off, please feel more than welcome.
All right, so I'm kind of nervous because I don't like talking in front of people. Hi, I'm Lorella. I'm from Zurich, and I'm actually a community builder. Like, that's my daily bread. I build communities as a living for brands, for people, for organizations, for NGOs. And it's at the center of everything is always the question, like, how can we create real value, and what do people want? When do people feel like they belong somewhere or they want to belong somewhere? And I think this word expansion is what I just noticed in the last 10 years, that people love to feel, to look back and feel like they expanded in some way. I don't know, whatever is important to them, their knowledge, their consciousness, their abilities, their skills. And communities work if people feel like they're expanding in the same direction, or they want to expand in the same field. So yeah, this is something that really gets me. I think, yeah, I don't know how I should say that, but it's really interesting to observe, because I always have to observe the communities like I build and what is going on in discussion, and consult people in what they could create in order to motivate the people to expand together, or to find out what is the shared value, like what kind of value do these people have in common. And this is the way brands and companies should communicate, actually, that they shouldn't like put people in demographic, but they should find like the shared value those people have, because this is like way more important to keep a community growing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lorella. Thank you. If anyone else has responses, we don't have to pass directly back to Toby, although I'm sure thoughts are bubbling. See some other folks in the chat.
I have something, Vivek.
Please, Brenna. Thank you.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed, Andy, your mention of like authenticity and branding, and how Patagonia can do all this cool stuff like donating profits and helping build trails, but that doesn't mean that if you wear Patagonia, you go camping and leave no trace. And it made me think about the difference between signs and symbols. Like signs are kind of just this marker for other people that point in a certain direction, and they're kind of less than the thing that they point to. Whereas symbols are like participatory, and they really capture like a sense of like what it's like to be a certain thing. So like this, the symbolism of a tree shares like all this wisdom and timelessness and ancestry. Whereas, you know, a sign pointing to a big tree just says like that particular tree's name, but it's not the tree itself. And I wonder how that relates to branding and culture kind of as we shift towards this next stage of the internet, what the role of signs of communities are, and then like the role that symbols play as well. And kind of as if things become more commoditized, like a Patagonia logo on a t-shirt, at what point a symbol becomes a sign, and in doing so loses a lot of its meaning.
Perhaps room for one more if anyone else would like to chime in, and then we can see if that's brought anything up for Toby or Andy.
I would like to bring something up. So I'm thinking about this basic concept of applying design, going from brand to culture, and essentially creating ways of thinking and valuing in people by creating culture. And I'm wondering if that could potentially be really harmful, because we see it, for example, in politics within the United States, that cultures are diverging and values are different, and it's making politics, you know, even more divisive than it was in the past, and making it harder to reach consensus on public policy. It's reached a level where it's harmful to the point of potentially being destructive. And so I guess the question is, like, what responsibilities should come with thinking about designing culture?
If I may, Toby, we have
Please.
both Mariana and then perhaps Sister Tababo, both who I would love to hear from. Mariana, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. First thing, thank you. This is so wonderful to listen to all this incredible lines. And well, I have a question, and yes, culture, building and brands and symbols, because well, there are brands, are commercial brands, there yes, well, I decide to put it in the mind outside, but happen things like in Instagram or Pinterest that shapes, in example architecture, it shapes bodies, but globally, yeah, totally global, and it's in the way that they show images and create culture and symbols and brands. And well, I am not really developer, and my question is how well, how much is the developer can influence these elections from brands that at the end makes a culture and shapes the world, and how many it's not cannot manipulate these decisions are inside the code and is at the end just the code which decide how to shape the world. That's a bit my question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And then perhaps if Sister Tibetwa, if you're willing, always good to hear from you.
Greetings of love and light and peace and darkness, Colonel family. It's very interesting reasoning again tonight. Really touched my heart when we're talking about how we can, how do we come together, what's required. I loved the reasoning about expansion, that's something that we need to experience within the coming together. We have also amplification, because when we do come together, we do amplify. I did put up on the chat an ultimate challenge that was given, as I say, by Haile Selassie, who of course is my mentor, in 1963. He's asking us to be greater in spirit and larger in outlook. So you have the same expansion going on there, where we're being asked to become more than we've ever been before, and to find answers to questions that may never have been posed before, to become greater, as I say, greater in outlook, and our allegiance not to nations, but to the greater human community. And so I do wonder these days about so much of what we think we are and what we identify as. Those building blocks have been given to us by the same corrupt and flawed society and systems that we are now maybe trying to reevaluate and create a new whole outlook. So as I say, as always, loving the reasoning, loving the courage to be able to look at these things. I guess for Toby, I will ask what I ask again and again. Is there anything that, like, any tips, any hacks, anything that he's learned, how to make human relations within the community run more smoothly? I'm a little concerned, without kind of mentioning anything about, even within our Ethereum family, about, rifts that, could be. Is there an elder council? Like, where do we go to for peaceful reconciliation? Where do we go to for conflict resolution? If we're looking at a new way of doing things in the Web3, well, yeah, like, can we think about that? Thank you.
I heard a couple things, both from Sister Tibetwa and also Ray, about what is the responsibility, and specifically of culture designers. And I honestly think that the most important work people who are taking that type of thing on can do is to work on themselves. If you don't have your own, if you're emotionally underdeveloped, and you don't have the ability to process your own emotions, hold them while also being aware of them, then you're definitely putting people who work with you or are being directly influenced by you at risk. I mentioned in this piece that psychologists go through many years of training themselves before they are okay to become a psychologist. likewise, if you become a pastor, you are probably, you know, training with your congregation for a long time and understanding your community before you're ready. And even you know, clergy have you know, people they confess to. So the become good, become good. That's the only thing I found that like can truly seems to guarantee better outcomes. Because the more you know yourself, the more you're in, and the more you know, totality of human emotions and suffering you've experienced, the more you're able to understand that in others and empathize with it, and like want to, and the more you'll want to create something that enables that for them, instead of being in service of some sort of other goal.
Yeah. Yeah, like it goes a lot into this idea of just like spirited environments, whatever that may mean, and that spirit must flow first through one person. I think that's the part that I really do enjoy about this section that Andy brought up, right? Culture designers are inculcating people who are caring, giving, and selfless, or take action to improve the world and the lives of those around them in some ways. And the like recognition built in there is that there is some way that flows differently. And it, I hope, ties in some sense to what we're talking about with Ethereum as a meaning-making machine, because there's this sense, at least that seems to be prevalent in kernel, that healthy communal space is one of the like hopes and outcomes that grassroots spaces can be inculcated, and that they come from this particular type of spirit. And that a part of the work happening is, can we bring new forms of money into our meaning-making communities? But those new forms of money are secondary to meaning-making communities. And so I think it's really interesting to think about it as, you know, both something that can be happening at the grassroots level, but also in the post, there's the suggestion that brands might not be going far enough. It's not a bad outcome, perhaps, if branded subcultures, whether it's, I know in the last token communities call, there was a recognition that, you know, Nike is exploring their own token. There are all sorts of projects and brands that are thinking about what their Web3 strategy may be, and some of them are working alongside people that are on this call. But the question is, can those branded subcultures be spirited? Can they be non-extractive? Can they build meaningful environments? One of the examples that Toby I always bring up is, you know, if there was like a Kendrick Lamar subculture, and I'm a big fan of his music, and they could bring me into a space with 10 other people that are really into his music for some reason. Could that be a non-extractive and meaningful environment? That's not, you know, just going to a concert, which is perhaps the one way that today these artists sense is their way out of a machine or a flywheel that they need to be on. So just kind of curious to think about like what those environments might look like, those non-extractive and meaningful ones. I'm curious for any other thoughts.
I think I have just two things to add, which is that to Mariana's questions about like to what extent do developers influence the culture. Like for me, the primary recognition here is that they can't do it alone, right? Like that's what's important about like this discussion, is that like, yes, developers play a role in terms of like designing incentive mechanisms or like programming some of the like protocol level infrastructure which enables like certain kinds of relationship, but they can't do it alone, right? And that's primary to like, instead of asking like about like what quantities is the pie cut into, it's like how is the pie there at all? And it's certainly not only as a result of developers, it comes about through relationship. And like that to me is always like primary to understand. prior to then asking, okay, who is responsible for like what portion of the pie? And in fact, like we can talk about who is responsible for which ingredients, but the way that the thing gets mixed together, baked, and then comes out, and the taste of the pie has no, like it is related to, but somehow qualitatively different than the flour that was brought by a particular person or a particular skill set, right? It's like one way that I've always thought about it's just like, instead of asking like who is responsible for what, it's this recognition that like there is no pie unless we're all here together doing the thing, right? And if it's just a bunch of developers, like sustainable and resilient culture, which is like loving and serving and like giving of oneself, that emphasizes leadership as hospitality and the kinds of things that Sister has put in the chat is not possible. And I like the one other feature, because I agree with Toby that like, okay, like what is the responsibility on culture designers? Be good. But there is like something else, right? Perhaps to think about. And it comes like in module 5 in kernel, which is all about tokens. There is a really, really beautiful piece from a research group called Project Horseshoe, who are a bunch of game designers that did a whole bunch of research on logistics, on economics, and psychology, right? The psychology of pro-social games. And one of the profound points that they make in this rather long research essay that is summarized in kernel is that, they're like, well, isn't it a problem that we like kind of open sourcing all of this knowledge about like how to measure like pro-social proxies in games, because like it can equally be used to manipulate the emotions of players in really negative directions, which is exactly what Toby is saying in the Life After Lifestyle essay. He's like, I took 6 years, Toby, to write this essay, and I was like gnashing my teeth about like, should I put the stuff out there, because might it not enable brands to do exactly the thing which I'm worried about? And I think that like when one like does the work on yourself, you come to this recognition, as the Project Horseshoe designers did, and as Toby does in this essay, that having the knowledge shared is the best remedy toward manipulative and obscure ways of using it, or ways which obscure the uses to which like cultural design happens, right? And there's something of the quality of faith and courage in that, right? Because we can't be sure. The Project Horseshoe designers couldn't be sure when they put out like, look, this is how you think about pro-social design, and this is how you can like think about like measuring time spent together and time spent talking positively and time spent in high emotional situations that have the chance of success, all of which are important for like really gripping game design, and all of which can be abused enormously to produce like attention-sucking extractive corporate games. But like knowing that this is the framework, knowing that this is the way that we think about this stuff, and spreading that knowledge to more people is the only legitimate way we have of counteracting the forces in the world that would lead to greater extraction and more manipulative uses of these ideas. And there is, like, as I say, there's something of like deep bravery, there's something of faith in that, and there's something of what like the Christians, because Toby referenced them earlier, would call kenosis, right? Emptying out all of your preconceptions of who you are and how important your ideas are and how world-changing they are, and just being humble and playful about them, right? Like the English translation of kenosis is emptiness or humility, right? But profound humility. It's the humility of like Christ on the cross is what it's really talking about, right? That who like that which knows their divinity and is yet willing to die, right? And that to me is like something interesting and profound about like responsibility, not just in terms of myself and the work that is necessary to do here, but then how that translates into our collective environments, which is just about like share what you know and do it in a playful and humble way, and in ways which invite people in to understand more about it and to work with you on it, because like that's how we get around like extractive and manipulative use, potentially. But this is an article of faith, not of certainty.
This flows really well with Ashley's comments or questions really in this chat. How do the systems we live in and their incentive structures set us up to build meaningful and non-extractive companies is the fact that we operate in an extractive system preventing us. And I think Andy is kind of exploring these two things. I wonder, Victor and Salim, perhaps we start with Victor, if that's okay, and then we go to Salim, and we have about 10-ish minutes before we'll transition to gather.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I just have like it's like a question, but also like an observation on the little experience I have with this kind of care communities, right? I think, I mean, in my experience, and again, it's little. When these care communities exist, you expect this kind of softness and this kind of cushionness about it, right? Where we are taking care of each other, right? And we support each other, right? Then it always somehow happens in the real world and in the online world that when you objectivize this, when you come to numbers, and we start talking about numbers, currency, if you like, then things become not so cushy. They're not so soft. And actually, people grab an edge when you start talking about numbers, especially when you talk about numbers from different places, you know, because a number is very different in Europe, that the same number is very different in Colombia or Ecuador or Indonesia. That same number is very, very different. So my question, I don't know, observation is like, how do you have a gradient for going from this, or if there exists a kind of gradient for the going this cushionness that is the most important thing, the softness, the caring, to this kind of really sharp, objective, razor sharp, objective thing that is the number. I really, this puzzles me. I don't know how to deal with it because as I get my little experience is that people become not so soft when you start talking about these numbers.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Victor. Perhaps as we let that noodle, because that one is, I think it's a beautiful one, Victor, that honestly we will return to many, many times. So I hope you forgive us if it's not answered right away, but it really is a beautiful question. Thank you. Perhaps Salim, and then if we have any last words from Toby, perhaps before we move to gather.
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking, this got me, this whole conversation around forms of extraction, accepted forms of extraction in different communities, how they align, whether developers play a role. Got me just thinking about if we're working on our adventure and we're thinking about levers of control, like what can we really control and how, when we're laying the foundations of our projects. Sister's point about like reconciliation got me thinking about, you know, walking a mile in somebody's shoes. Are there, you know, there are communities like Ethereum and Maker are very strongly aligned communities, like within themselves, right? Ethereum people think a certain way, Maker people think a certain way, you know, but yet there's still like beefs within those communities. And then you have a place like Kernel, which is actually super diverse in a lot of belief systems here that come together. And it actually got me thinking of like, even like pick an extreme case. So like, what about like My Lady Makers, right? Who are very interested in media and, you know, playing around, but actually when you look at their politics, they seem to only be on extremes, but they don't care which. But like with My Lady and Maker, you already have some accepted form of financial gain, which we could define as extraction, right? So does that kind of, so what are the, you know, we're I think almost all of us here would describe ourselves as altruists, and we're trying to figure out ways to make the world better. But we see the danger and the levers we might control as well. So I was just walking through these examples. I was wondering if they flush up any any advice really, like what are the levers that we truly have control over at this stage, and what are the things that we should think about to get, you know, to not, to not make a mistake.
Yeah, very good question. I think this gets to like the heart of it. You said like accepted forms of extraction. There's like some people in like the crypto space have talked about like the idea of like minimally extractive protocols, which is, you know, the lowest possible fee you can charge without being forked. But then when you look at you know, communities which are subscription services, but also providing some sort of spiritual home for their users, for their subscribers, as weird as that sounds, here it looks more like a, this is no longer extraction, but like something more like tithing, or, you know, paying a stream of funds to your preferred site of belonging. And in between these, like, you know, customer centric models of like, let's be minimally extractive so we don't get forked, and like this, I pay effectively a tax or tithe to my site of belonging, there's weird stuff like Maker, if you consider it a type of public good, or Rye, or like Miladies, which is more on the this is for a community end of things. But like if you look at what they did with like the Dune like art book, like have shown pretty clear willingness to rug their community. I guess if you turn around, like extraction implies some sort of directionality, like here's a thing we take from you, and their extraction is permitted in the in like the case where it is a business of some, like to some degree. But in the case of public good, it like maybe becomes less extraction. And then in the case of community, it's, if it's, you know, giving, then I think we can just ask the questions about the directionality. Like, are you, like, what are you serving by like obtaining funds? In order to actually be, in order to actually have resources, the community, entity, protocol, whatever it is, it needs a powerful viability mechanism. And I think a lot of people who want to create these healthier spaces don't acknowledge the, like how key that is. Obviously, you can create a healthy space without having that strong of a viability mechanism, and it'll be very small. But if you want to grow that, then you need some sort of viability mechanism. And I think effective altruism is like a good example of what that looks like. They basically encourage tithing as a principle, so you have to give money to it. So they end up having like pretty strong network effects with like they've targeted a certain community. It's a totally, you know, ideological one, or it's like this is a mechanism that lives only in your head. But you know, membership basically means giving of a certain type, and then there are certain tiers. If you are like, you know, at the very top, you can do a giving pledge type of thing. When you're thinking about protocol design, like you also are thinking about mechanism design of this sort, but coding it in a smart contract or a protocol. And then I think if you are trying to do that and also create some sort of like altruistic or like wholesome space, then what's really important is to set out at the beginning and like encode the kind of bylaws, like in the mission of the protocol. Like give protocol designers like have to give themselves permission to use funds for a certain purpose. We do a lot of work with Uniswap at Other Internet, and Uniswap is a weird thing that like has the ability to turn on fees and would collect a huge amount of fees, but and it has this kind of Ethereum ethos, but there's no document, there's no charter, there's nothing around that says Uniswap has permission to like take these fees and donate them to charities which like sponsor financial inclusion or you know, are about financial literacy, even though those seem like they could be key to like what Uniswap cares about if Uniswap has values as like a DEX. So I think this is the design space we're playing with. Like the parameters are that we have to work with are like the scale of the thing, the strength of the viability mechanism, and values like human-centric values being like literally enshrined from the start, so that like they live in the minds of people who are participants and like, you know, paying into the system, whether it's via some sort of mechanism that charges them for the use of the thing or whether it's voluntary. That was a lot, but yeah, that consists my thoughts on like altruism versus like mechanism design and like extractive logic.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Go ahead, Andy.
One more thing there, because I think Toby's response is a stunning one and like well worth chewing on. And the one other thing that I will like throw into the stone soup there is that what is it that you have control over in your adventure, Salim? It's like how you define collusion is another like way of looking at this, right? Like Vitalik has this notion that like anything which doesn't clearly define collusion tends toward the financial. And so like if you think back to what we were saying in trust last week, like to develop trustless protocols that then allow new trust spaces, you have to define and encode what it means to cheat. And like Toby, I think, is like pointed at that by saying like scale not verifiability, other mechanism, viability, excuse me, and like enshrining in people's minds the like human ideals. Like when we're clear about what collusion means in our context, then things don't always have to tend toward the financial, but they can include financial elements within a wider social sphere, which like is my understanding, Victor, of how you make that gradient like a little bit softer from like the enshrined in people's minds toward like numbers. It's like if you define what collusion is in this context, it's not universal, right? Like the 21 million rule in Bitcoin is not universal. It's not this is an absolute truth of the universe that there will only be 21. It's like this in this context, when we use this network here, like this is the limit, and here's the line of code which like enacts that limit, right? And so when we can define what it means to collude in particular contexts, we can prevent the entire context from sinking into the financial while including financial elements that amplify the wider like social goals enshrined in people's heads and the viability of those goals as they're enacted in protocols. So like it's something to think about in like if you're building like software for your adventures, like what can you control? You can control what cheating is in your context, and if you're clear about that, you can. It seems history is proof of this. That you can have some pretty profound effects in terms of like widespread behavior.
I'd like to add something to that as well. So in addition to the entity organization having a defined offering and having that mechanism for viability and the values, it's also possible to explicitly have a purpose, which is really important, because with a purpose, an organization can potentially say that if this can generate more than is necessary for its own viability, we can go ahead and feel free to generate that because we've already thought about what we would put it into. And that's a mechanism that now exists with the PBCs, public benefit companies in the United States, that instead of the default simply being, okay, it's profit, and it devolves to that, just profit, then it's, well, what's done with that money? Where does it go? Which is something really powerful that is mostly overlooked by all the organizations in the world. Lots of exceptions, but by and large, mostly people just think about having profit.
Yeah. Thank you, Ray. Thank you. Beautiful. Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. We're officially at the late crew of Fireside. If I could do one thing, and I hope Toby will allow for this, I just want to read a quick line from the end of Life After Lifestyle. I guess it'll be 8 lines, and then head us off to Gathertown for whoever wants to join there. Put the link in. It's at the bottom of Life After Lifestyle. It says, when the night comes down and the color of things recedes from the earth, these trifles assume their honest form, and we dance in their stead and laugh so our glinting teeth blur in the firelight. We dance to keep ourselves warm, for what else? And if we look forward to tomorrow, it is to feel the muscle soreness, for what else? I hope that we continue dancing with you, Toby, and with everyone else here. It really, really means a lot for you being here. We'll keep the party going in Gather, and we'll see you all soon, I'm sure. Thank you, thank you, thank you.